on Tuesday, September 15th. Today, we're super pleased to have author Alex Soojung-Kim Pang here. He's going to talk about his book, Shorter, which is all about something that might be of great interest to everyone who's working through these crazy times. Shorter works better, smarter, and less. Here's how. I know I will be listening very, very closely to get some tips and info from Alex's research. So he's going to talk about the book a little bit, and then we will be able to answer questions. We can see all your questions coming in through the comments under this video. So at the end of the presentation, we will look there and ask for questions from you. What do you want to know from Alex? Thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in the book, you can, of course, purchase it at majorsandquinn.com. I will put a link in the comments as well so that you can go straight there. But for now, I am going to leave it to Alex, and he's going to tell you all about how to work better and shorter.
So, well, thank you very much, Annie, and thank you to all of you for joining this virtual event. It's been really interesting to be, doing a book tour at a time when nobody can actually go to bookstores, and so it's great that that bookstores like this have created virtual events that can bring us together. So I've got a couple slides that, hello from Bath, Maine, fabulous. So I've got just a few slides that I thought I would share just to give you kind of a overview of the book and its argument. So I am going to start sharing the window. So this is actually the third book in what has turned out to be kind of a trilogy about technology and work and rest, starting with a book I wrote almost 10 years ago about technology and distraction, and then a book about the role of rest in the lives of super creative and prolific people. And most recently, my new book about Shorter, about how companies can take the lessons of rest and put them into practice in their own companies, in their own industries. And rest really was about highly creative, accomplished people like Nobel laureates, like Charles Darwin, whose statue is here. And it was, and it explained, using a combination of history and neuroscience and psychology, why it is that leisure turns out to be a really valuable thing for making us more creative and giving us better, more sustainable lives. The challenge, of course, is that lots of us are in jobs, we're in professions that keep us super busy. And we don't have the opportunities that, let's say, a Beethoven or a Hemingway had to organize their lives pretty much however they wanted. And so the question that was outstanding from rest was, okay, what do the rest of us do? And I think in super busy companies that this is, it's not just a challenge for individuals, it's a challenge for organizations too, because high-tech companies, the restaurant industry, there are lots of industries that face perennial problems, challenges with burnout, with managing work-life balance, with recruiting and keeping people. And so I think that the kind of culture of busyness and overwork is one that in the long run creates problems for organizations and companies and economies, just as it does for individuals. Now, in Shorter, I look at companies that have reduced their total working hours. So there are some firms that now offer a 4-day week where you work 10-hour days. I wasn't interested in those. I see the virtue of that approach, but I was really interested in places that go to, 4-day weeks working 8-hour days, or 40 hours to 32, or sometimes even 30 or 25 hours. Also companies where productivity stayed the same, and really, really critically, where salaries stayed the same. So the idea in these places is you're doing the same work, you're doing the same essentially amount of work or meeting the same kinds of deadlines, and you're not taking a pay cut. This is not about saving the company money or having to deal with, overproduction or being in a recession or so forth. The companies that I found range really widely from um, call center in Glasgow, Scotland, called Pursuit Marketing, to restaurants, to software companies in Asia. Um, Korea and Japan turn out to be hotspots for companies working shorter hours, despite or maybe because of the fact that each language has its own word for working yourself to death. This is also very much a global movement, right? I think, we've all heard in the news about places, let's say in Scandinavia, that have moved to 4-day weeks or 6-hour days. But it's not just Nordic countries with, super strong social safety nets and high taxes that have done it. Companies in the US and Canada, elsewhere in Europe, Colombia, Australia, New Zealand, and China and Japan and Korea have all have all been part of this global movement. So let's talk about a little bit about the benefits. For one thing, it turns out that shortening working hours can be great for companies. This is a Korean software company called Woowa Brothers. They're an e-commerce company. They have an app that is sort of like DoorDash or Uber Eats. And they started reducing their working hours when they were a young, scrappy, hungry company in 2015, trying to attract the kinds of software engineers and robotics people and AI folks who normally would go to an SK or a Samsung. One of the things that they did was reduce their working hours to 37 and a half hours a week. And this is down not from 40, but more like, 50, 50 plus hours. You can see since they did that, their revenues have grown in the last 4 years more than tenfold. And in fact, early this year, they were purchased by a Singaporean company for upwards of $4 billion. So, and this is an unusually this is an unusual rate of growth, but it's not really extraordinary. Lots of the companies that I talk about in Shorter report profitability going up, productivity going up, well in excess of, let's say, the 20 or 25% that you need to make up for working fewer hours. Another example is Pursuit Marketing, where I showed that picture. After 2 years, productivity was up 30%. And, this is a call center. So they're measuring absolutely everything: the number of minutes you're on a call, the amount of money you're making per day and per week. They've got numbers for everything. So when they say productivity is up 30%, they really know what they're talking about. Retention is up to 98%, which in this industry, where people are job hopping all the time, is really, really incredible. And Glasgow also is a place that is like the call center of Europe. And so there are lots of competitors there. It's a very big market, lots of job mobility. Revenues more than doubled from £2 million to £5 million. And then it also has a great impact on how companies operate and how people collaborate. So these are numbers from a company in Copenhagen, Denmark called IIH Nordic. And they survey every week how happy people are, how they've gotten on this week, how they're, how well they're collaborating. And you can see here, starting in early 2015, when they introduced a 4-day work week, that numbers for relationships with peers, how well you're getting on with your colleagues, have gone up very substantially and now place this company within, the top 10% of companies that use this particular measure. And then just one final example is a medical editing company in London called Synergy Vision. They moved to a 4-day work week in the end of 2019. And they did a survey right, right before they moved to a 4-day week and 6 months later. Not surprisingly, the number of people who describe themselves as happy or very happy, 9 or a 10, go from 12% to 51%. And, people talk about having more work-life balance, about being able to keep up with personal tasks. Not surprising when you've got a 3-day weekend. But the really interesting number, the surprising one for me, is the one at the very bottom: can keep up with work. The percentage of people who say that they can keep up with their work goes from 50% to nearly 80% exactly at the same time that the length of the week is dropping. So, all of these give you a sense of the value that the 4-day week can bring both to individuals, but also to organizations, and suggest that shortening the work week can be, not just a you know, it's not like it has to be a concession to to employees, or kind of something where one side gains and the other side loses. Instead, when done right, the 4-day week or other kinds of shorter work weeks become a tool that companies can use to help people be happier, to help them have better work-life balance, but also to make the company a better place, better in terms of profitability, in productivity, in retention, in sustainability. And how it is that companies do that, and how I think virtually any company can do that now, is the subject of shorter. So, I will at this point stop the presentation, and I will ask Annie back, and we can see if there are any questions that people have.
Well, I have a question to
Okay, go for
start
it.
off. So this is obviously, something that I think has been on. People have been clearly trying it at different companies for a
Mhm.
while. We've also, like in tandem, been hearing a lot of articles and things. Everyone's talking about burnout, burnout, burnout. So of course, people are looking for alternatives. So, what do you think the barriers that are stopping more companies from doing this,
Right.
like emotional or cultural or whatever? Like why isn't more of this experimentation being done, even though you were successful in finding many places that are trying it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that the answer partly is um, cultural, partly structural. The cultural part of it boils down to this is the way we've always done it.
Mhm.
We live in an era where I think really for the last 30 years or so, we have we have grown up with the idea that in order to be a success in today's always on globalized 24/7 marketplace, that you need you know you need to be constantly working. You need to under promise and over deliver. That our heroes of modern capitalism are figures who talk about how they sleep only 4 or 5 hours a night and work 90-hour weeks. Right? We have this image of success that says that when you look at hedge fund guys or tech startup billionaires, the way you become rich now is not by or starting at the bottom, waiting your turn, climbing the ladder, and eventually getting to the top of your industry. The way that it was, let's say, 50 years ago, when General Motors and General Electric were both run by guys named Charlie Wilson, both of whom had started had started at their companies 30 years earlier in the mailroom and worked their way up. That's not how success works any longer, so we're told. It works by, or you know, working titanic numbers of hours before, like, the next turn of Moore's law renders your great idea completely obsolete.
Mhm.
And if you can do that, if you can be a billionaire by the time you're 30, then awesome. And if not, then it's dustbin of history for you. So it is not Charlie Wilson who's our great model, but like Kendall Jenner. The other thing is that another factor is that when that there are structural things at work, right? It is we are we do many industries operate in environments that sort of that are genuinely global. The fact that we have someone participating in this event from Maine, I'm here in California, you're in the Midwest. This is a nice little example of the way in which technology allows even little people like me to multiply our reach. And I think that there are the fact that business operates 24/7, that companies have traditionally assumed that they need to be open ever longer hours in order to satisfy more customers from a wider variety of places. All
Mhm.
of that contributes to this sense that the ideal company is one that's never closed, and the ideal worker is one who never has to sleep. And it is really difficult to challenge that kind of cultural programming, to challenge assumptions about the way that your industry works, or the stories that it tells about how you become successful and how you make a successful business. But
Yeah.
you know all of the people who I write about in the book are people who are experienced entrepreneurs. They're professionals. They're often serial entrepreneurs who realize at a certain point that a lot of these stories that we tell about how we have to work really are just stories.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah.
And this is what sets them on the path to figuring out how it is that they can take their companies in a different direction, and create working lives that are better for everybody. So that's my answer.
Great. No, yeah, I think that's the thing that kind of shocks everyone when, you know, or that's where everyone gets stuck, right? Is that you hear this great, really compelling information, and like, well, if that information hasn't changed, hasn't done anything. But yeah, I think going off of that, we are currently living through a time when even companies that maybe weren't thinking about changing what they were doing in any way
Hmm.
have had to readjust the way that their workforce is organized and how their work days are organized. Like anywhere from an independent bookstore readjusting where our staff hours are put, like what jobs different staff are doing at different times, completely changed, to large tech companies with salaried people and everything. So this kind of relates to a comment over here. So yeah, wondering if the work from home experiment that we are all experiencing has lessons on these the potential for shorter days and weeks as well.
That's a terrific question. And the answer is yes, they can. Yes, this experience can. And I've actually been, continuing to look at companies that have shortened their working hours.
Mm-hmm.
I've got more than 100 companies I talk about in the book, and I've probably found another 50 or so in the last 9 months that have continued to do this. A whole bunch of them have actually moved to 4-day weeks during the pandemic, which you would think is like the worst possible time to make a big change like this, because you're having to change everything else, right? What they tell me is that you know we had to go virtual. We had to make our workforces all remote. And sometimes in a couple of these companies, they already were remote. They were software companies where you had developers in 5 different countries, so they already were living on Slack and Google Docs.
Right.
But the ones that didn't had to go remote really quickly. And discovered, fortunately for them, that they were actually able to get the work done, even if the owners had previously thought, work from home is the hill I will die on. This will absolutely never work in my company ever, ever, ever.
Mhm.
Um, at the same time, so they find that technology has enabled growth and productivity and greater flexibility in work. At the same time, there is a greater pressure, thanks to the fact that everything else has collapsed, to for people to have more time to deal with children, to recover from the stresses of trying to carry on something like normal life during a pandemic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so what these companies have done is move to 4-day weeks, often first off as a kind of temporary thing or just to kind of try it out, and then realizing, hey, this actually works. People really like it. It doesn't affect our bottom lines. We're going to make this permanent.
Mhm.
And so I think that I am continuing to see companies doing this either on a temporary basis with great success. Shopify, which is the Canadian startup that does the e-commerce startup that
Yeah.
works with online stores, they gave their people 1 day off a week for the entire summer. The
Mhm.
whole summer they were working 4-day weeks because the CEO realized no one was taking vacation time because no one could take vacation time because there was nowhere to go. And he was really worried that people were going to start burning out. And so
Mhm.
he implemented this program, and the company has done great. People thought it was, the greatest thing ever. Other places, Twitter, Google, for example, have given what they call mental health days, which are
Mhm.
just kind of the occasional day off, sort of announced at short notice. And I'm also, I'm beginning to hear stories of companies in other parts of the world that are doing similar things. So I think that, yes, it is. I think that, you know, what the pandemic has done is let the horse out of the barn for flexible work and remote work.
Yeah.
I don't think any boss any longer can say work from home won't work here.
Right.
you know we may, it may very well be the case that we want to have some kind of hybrid system where people are in the office part of the week and out of the office part of the week. I think one of the things we've learned is that there are actually really good things about being in an office and being around other people and
Mhm.
having that piece of our social lives back that we would like to get back. That doesn't mean, though, that we have to go back to the 5-day 9 to 5.
Mhm.
And I think that when once the vaccine comes, once we are able to sort of resume some kind of new normal, I think a lot of companies are going to look at this and ask themselves, all right, if we started with a blank sheet of paper and we redesigned the workday, what would it look like? It doesn't have to look like the way that it did before. So what is it that we really want? What is it that technology enables? What is it that remote work allows us to do? And what is it that offices you know facilitate?
Mhm.
And I think that a lot of places will be asking those questions and continuing to experiment with how they work and figure out how they can work better. So
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious about, you mentioned the call center, which they certainly have, different. Well, I'm imagining they have sort of a shift work
mhm.
culture, but a lot of times when we have these discussions, we're by default a lot talking about the types of jobs that the work itself is flexible, mostly computer based. Maybe we're talking mostly about salaried work,
Mhm.
so there's that sort of flexibility in who is where and how long they're doing it for. In your research, did you were you able to encounter companies that were attempting to look into this kind of thing with their hourly workers, service industry, that kind of thing?
Great question. The answer is yes. One of the I Okay, first off, one of the industries that has been experimenting with the 4-day week most has been the restaurant industry,
Mhm.
where, and it started with 3-star Michelin restaurants, places like Noma or Faviken, where, these are restaurants where, I mean, they can do absolutely anything they want, right? They could just be open on February 29th, right? Every 4 years. And they would still, and their waiting list would be 30 years long, and they could charge whatever they wanted. They've kind of, the ordinary rules of economics don't quite apply to them.
Right.
But a few years ago, those places, you know, these are restaurants where creativity is an absolute premium. You
Mhm.
have to keep reinventing reinventing your menu and kind of reinventing yourself. That's a really, really hard thing to do,
Yeah.
while at the same time you are delivering unbelievable quality every single night to very demanding people. And so some of these restaurants a few years ago started experimenting with 4-day weeks as a way of giving themselves more time to experiment and giving people, just line cooks and servers, more time to recover. And what they found was that, yeah, this actually worked really well for everybody. Some of the, a couple chefs talk about how if they hadn't done this, then, they would have burned out within a year and would have had to have closed the restaurants. So now this is starting to filter down to other places. So that fabulous, that fabulous culinary establishment, Shake Shack, um, has introduced 4-day weeks for its managers. I don't know if they've done it yet for the cooks, but Shake Shack has had a big challenge with recruiting and retaining store managers, and the 4-day week was a way of helping, create create a more pleasant environment for them. There's also nursing homes, which are kind of more serious kinds of places. And there's been a small movement to create for certified nurses assistants, right? The people who spend huge amounts of time with residents, right? Help them get dressed, help them bathe, organize social activities, get them to meals, to pay them 40 hours work for 30 hours time, assuming they meet certain benchmarks.
Mhm.
And certified nurses assistants jobs are ones where that, in terms of salary, are basically competing with fast food, right? They're low paid jobs. They are, on the other hand, extremely stressful, and you get, and so turnover normally is incredibly high.
Mhm.
This isn't good for for the companies. It also isn't very good for, for residents, particularly people with memory issues. Having to see new faces every couple months is not such a great thing. The These 30-40 programs, in contrast, turn out to be ones that, yes, require hiring more people, because you're going, let's say, to 6-hour shifts rather than 8-hour shifts.
Sure.
So you've got 4 shifts rather than 3 per day, which means you're paying people more. You've got more people, and you're also paying those people more. But it turns out that um, these nursing homes will save so much money in, like, job advertisements and recruitment fees, and not having to spend money on temporary agencies. Someone calls in an hour before their shift starts, and you got to scramble, and you have to hire someone very expensive to cover that. They save so much money on those things that it virtually pays for the program, which is, which is just amazing. So, it's definitely not like just creatives and full stack software developers who can benefit from this. It is, baristas and line chefs and nurses, people who work in steel mills.
Mhm.
There's, I think, almost every industry that does kind of traditional shift work is capable of making this move now.
Yeah, that is a great answer, and I'm so glad that you know you have so much knowledge about it on like kind of all
I
over
did
different
I
industries.
did literally write the book on this subject. So
Exactly. It's like, oh man, I love it. So what? the stat that you pointed out, where more people were answering that they felt they could keep up with work
Hmm.
even though they were working less, is obviously extremely fascinating, because I think that's what a lot of people feel, right? Is we wish we were working less, but we like can't conceive of how we would accomplish that, because there's the sense of X amount of work that needs to get done, and yet somehow it seems that we might not be thinking of that in the right way. Can you
Right.
talk more about like the company that where you specifically found that stat from, or like just a little more of the background on that, because I think that's fascinating.
Sure. So this is a company called Synergy Vision, and they are sort of a medical instrument, not med- medical editing company.
Mm.
And so what that means is that they write the documentation that's used in clinical trials and things of that sort. And what they basic and they're you know, essentially the reason that people report that sense of having more time to get their work done was that even though the work week itself was shorter, people were wasting a lot less time than they had previously. There's some wonderful studies about time wasted in the workplace
Mhm.
that suggest that between multitasking and technology driven distraction and sort of those you know, one quick question interruptions that turn into 15-minute conversations,
Yeah.
that today people lose between 2 and 4 hours of productive time every single day. So if you can get a handle on that, you can go a long way to, first of all, doing 4 days, 5 days worth of work in four,
Mhm.
um, and also creating an environment that is not, as is so often the case with companies today or workplaces today, a kind of endless carnival of distractions, but rather a place where you can go in, do the work, and get out. And so that's what accounts for that subjective sense that people are able to get all the work done, even though objectively speaking they have fewer hours in which to do it. What
Mm.
happens is the way that they use time changes, and the way in which they experience that time also changes.
Yeah. Wow. Um, we just have a question here, that you're a very engaging speaker. Where do you do corporate retreats and management stuff? Where can people find you?
Yes, the answer is yes to both of those. So actually, if I can share the screen again, I will just try to toss off. Hang on one second here. I was going to put up my coordinates,
Oh, sure.
and so but yes, I do. Yeah, I do retreats. I do other kinds of stuff. For whatever reason, it's not showing up. However, if you Google me, I am the only Alex Soojung-Kim Pang in the world, which is great for search engines. Also, my company is Strategy and Rest. The website is strategy.rest. For me, very conveniently, REST is now a top level domain. And then you can also find me on Twitter at AskPang, AskPang. So, but yes, I do. Yeah, I, I do a good bit of speaking and sort of and events, which is part of why I've got this sort of home studio setup now.
Yeah. Complete with plants.
Yeah, no, that's my daughter's suggestion. So
Nice. Look lovely. Well, speaking of .rest, maybe could you tell us just a little bit about, you mentioned that your work has sort of become this trilogy of sorts, and everything's sort of related. So,
mhm.
previous book, Rest, how does that play in to our current situation and your new findings?
Oh, good question. So Um, well, what's going on? Okay, so there's not an awful lot of statistical or survey data on this, but what there is indicates that people are finding that even though they are at home a lot more, they have less time for rest because their normal routines in which they had set aside time for going to the gym,
Mhm.
meeting friends, etc. A lot of those routines have been disrupted, or the places in which they engaged in those activities are no longer available. Furthermore, we're seeing that some really challenging stuff that suggests that particularly working moms are having to do a lot more labor, because something on the order maybe of more than 2 hours per day, because they're having to do essentially they are also full-time teachers as well as full-time workers. um, I do think that one of the things that this does highlight is, first of all, the degree to which rest is absolutely essential, as not and for mental balance, for a psychological well-being, but also is really essential for for our working lives, and for our capacity to do the kind of work that we want to do.
Mhm.
And this is true not just for creative workers, but for everybody. First of all, there's hardly a kind of work anywhere that does not involve creativity and decision making and judgment of one sort or another, right? We call some kinds of jobs sort of low skilled and some creative. That's really a social judgment about what kind of work is economically valuable and what kinds of people are valuable, not objective assessments of how important that work is and how difficult it actually is. But I think we are. But one of the and COVID and the pandemic have reminded us of just how important routines that allow for rest are, and how far sixes and sevens our lives can get when we are denied time for those, or when our schedules no longer support them. So
Yeah. Oh,
I have, by the way, found
yeah.
the slide. So anyway, so yes, here are my coordinates.
I'll
So also my email right there is alex@strategy.rest. So I am happy to take questions if we can't get to them, or if people have questions that occur to them after this event. So um, that's that.
Yeah. I am just looking through, seeing. Yeah. Really, someone said I really need the discipline of turning away from distractions and not repeating the mantra of false busyness. Well, maybe that
Mm-hmm.
like she might want to take a look at your first book,
The
uh,
distraction addiction, yes,
Distraction
which
Addiction,
is an awful lot of that book is about exactly this challenge, and
which is yeah.
why why it is that that um, our relationship with technologies can take this kind of negative turn,
Mhm.
what it is about how they're designed that enable this, and what we can do to push back and to reclaim our focus and our attention. And I think that the thing is that we often think of technologies as being kind of like you know um, alienating, or sort of the opposite of human. Um, and that's my dog in the background. In fact, I actually let me toss up this distraction addiction. But we often think of technologies as being like alien, or dehumanizing. But in point of fact, our relationships with them are incredibly deep, often quite intimate, and they're ones that are super important to us, right? I mean, humans have literally evolved with our tools. This is a picture of a hand axe that's more than 2 million years old, along with I think that's the iPhone 4, which now feels like it's about 100 years old. But, you know, our, but it is literally the case that our hands have evolved with tools in order to, in response to the tools that we have created. And that, you know, our relationships with technologies are ones through which we can sometimes express, our deepest emotions, that help us be super creative, and that and you know can and that are implicated in some of the best times of our lives, right? You think of it, and they're not always they're not always a source of distraction. You think of musical instruments are a great example of a technology that does all kinds of great things. Anybody who has ever performed, I think, has had that experience of of being able to express things with instruments that they could not, or of just unassisted. And furthermore, of having that remarkable kind of mental experience of you know paying attention to the song, remembering the next chord, um, of knowing lyrics, of listening to your fellow musicians as you harmonize, paying attention to the crowd, feeding off the energy of the audience, all of which constitutes this incredibly complicated, like, symphony of information coming in and out, but which we do not experience as distraction. This is what we experience as what psychologists call flow. And I think, and what the distraction addiction is all about is how it is that people are able to get sort of to use technologies to have more of those kinds of moments, and to recover healthier relationships with technologies that allow us to be essentially allow us to be better humans. So that's what the distraction addiction is all about.
Yeah, I think it's all, this is obviously your virtual book tour is for Shorter. Your most recent book actually came out before we were live. Alex and I were talking about how his book came out pretty much right to the day almost that the majority of the country shut down. It was in March of this year. It was about 2 days before Majors and Quinn had our last in-person event. So obviously it's always a strange journey promoting a new book, and has only gotten stranger. So please go check the book out at majorsandquinn.com. But yeah, it just so happens that Alex's other books are also extremely relevant and helpful to this moment we are living through. So all three are available at majorsandquinn.com. I'll throw it out there if you want to get crazy with it. So yeah, I think we have gone through all the questions and comments we have. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. This video will remain available on Facebook and on our YouTube channel. So if you want to check it out or tell anyone about it, it will still be there if you want to search for it. And we really appreciate that. I appreciate you, Alex, logging on and taking me through Shorter. It's just such a fascinating topic. I love talking about it. So thanks very much. And I hope you all have a great evening.
Oh, thanks very much. Thanks. It's been a pleasure. And thank you